mamahissati upatya saivedam maranamagatam sada maranataya okasam vadakovya esati isakamane vattam tam satatam gamamusukam jivitam udaya attam suryo viyadavati.
So, how many of you had a chance to look at this diagram? The process of insight meditation. Anybody make any sense out of it?
This book speaks to that.
Yeah. That book may or may not have the same explanations as actually. This diagram is in that book called The Masterful Teachings of Gautama Buddha. And there it has an accompanying, text explaining this. Now, the five aggregates of clinging, as I mentioned this morning, are really, you could say, the whole of the Buddha's teaching is focused around the five aggregates of clinging. Because in the very first noble truth, the definition of suffering, Buddha gives three definitions of suffering, being birth, old age, disease, and death, and then the mental grief and crying and that accompanies old age, death, and sickness, and so on, or what he calls sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. So this is the kind of the common understanding of suffering that most people, they say they suffer. I'm suffering from kidney disease, I'm suffering from heart disease, or any number of ailments. But then there's so let's say it's primarily the, sort of connected with the physical aspect of the life, concerning the body and so on. But then there's the mental, the Buddha went on from there. He said that not getting what you want and getting what you don't want is suffering. And that is more of a mental condition. But of course, sickness and disease and death is something people don't want. But it's just the thought about it that causes them suffering more when they occur. But then he goes on to say, in short, the five aggregates of clinging are suffering. So that's why it's an important aspect of the teachings if one really wants to understand what the Buddha meant by suffering. Because sometimes I give talks here in this country on the Buddhist teachings, and talking about, the Buddha mentions suffering 4 times, right? Suffering, the cause of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the path leading to the cessation of suffering. So people hear that and they say, wait a minute, why are you talking about all this suffering? I want happiness. In yoga, they talk about Sat Chit Anand, knowledge, existence, bliss. The Buddha's talking about suffering, suffering, suffering. He said, I can't relate to all that suffering. My life's fine. Some people say. And I say, oh, well, do you ever have, some disturbed sleep at night? And the person says, well, yeah, my wife is sleeping around and, my kids are, doing mischief and smoking dope and getting in trouble. And so, I lose some sleep over that. And I say, oh, that's not suffering? And they say, oh, no, that's just normal, they say. So this type of person would find it very difficult to understand the teachings, of the Dhamma. Anyway, so the 5 aggregates of clinging, that means we cling to them as being mine, I, me, or mine. And basically, as you can refer, the first one is the physical body, but it's more than just the body. And why do they call them aggregates? The aggregates of clinging. Because it's all the various material things that we've experienced, even our whole lifetime, or even from previous lifetimes, they're all remembered in the unconscious mind. And so like even the Buddha, he went back with his psychic power, he was able to go back through his mind, kind of like from point A, and he said he remembered back to you could remember back to the first moment when you woke up this morning, or let's say the first moment in this lifetime, he could remember back everything he did. And then it flipped to the last moment in the previous lifetime. And then he went back in that way from that lifetime through every year of his birth until the day he was born in that life, and flipped to even the previous life. And he kept on doing that thousands of lifetimes, remembering every detail, what he ate each day, who he met, and so on. Now people would hear that and say, oh, they don't believe that, but it is possible. Because everything the mind has ever experienced, it's remembered. It's just like a computer. Look at this Google storage. They remember everything. Our brain is even better than that. Anyway, so it's everything that we remember having a physical contact with. We identify it. That is mine, or I was the owner of that. Or even our possessions now, we say my car, my dog, my house, my friends, and so on. So we're clinging to these, what they call the material aggregate. And what are all these things made up of? This material aggregate is made up of the 4 elements of earth, fire, water, and air. And basically all the material things in the world, you're a doctor, right? What is all the material things of the world made up of? Yeah, cells, molecules, atoms, electrons, and all those other, things that they talk about, quarks and black holes or whatever. But let's say just cells, molecules, atoms, in electrons. So anyway, so those go to form, the anything that we can, experience. But normally we think that they're permanent also. But anyway, in terms of the meditation, especially, we want to talk in a more practical experience in the meditation. So when you're feeling some of the body, if you feel some pain, you identify it as, my knee or my body. So you're clinging to it as mine. So that's why it's called an aggregate of clinging, where you cling to your material possessions. And then the feeling. So whatever you feel, whatever comes through the senses, it produces a feeling, either a pleasant feeling, painful feeling, or a neutral feeling. We kind of talked about yesterday. Question about that. But most of the things that affect us are due to the pleasant feeling and the painful feeling. Now the feeling is just, it's just a vibration in the nervous system, basically. In other words, a sound hits the ear. So that sets up a vibration of, electrons that are moving along through the nervous system. And then they reach the brain. So as those sensory vibrations are moving through our nervous system, they are picked up like radar as something pleasant or unpleasant. Even before you've recognized what it is fully, the nervous system has picked up on it as this is something pleasant or unpleasant or neutral. And then the mind cognizes it, which is called perception. That means because of language and because of other conditionings, the mind creates an object out of just vibrations, like a sound vibration. So just, for a moment, just close your eyes for a moment. Okay, close your eyes. Now, what did you hear?
Sound.
A sound, but you identified it, didn't you? There's a clap. Well, that's a mental image that the mind has created out of the sound. And so we do the same. You're looking up here, and so you're saying that's Bhante Rahula. That's simply because that's how you learn. But what's actually coming to your eye is color in certain shapes. So various colors in certain shapes, in a certain image that then is remembered by the brain, and that's perception. That's the job of the brain, is perception, or that aggregate of. So everything we've ever experienced, that perception, or that particular vibration that has a name, just like the baby learned all that when the baby learned in language. He sees the mother's face and says, Mommy, Daddy, cat, Fido, whatever. And so it's that name that's identified with either a visible object, even sound. You can, the sound of your mother's or from father's voice or anybody else's voice, maybe my voice by now. But it's just because of that habit of the function of the memory and so on. But anyway, that's a perception. And we cling to those perceptions also as being something real, when actually they're actually just a mental picture, basically. And It's funny when let's say eating food, you look at food, you say, oh, that's my favorite food because of the smell. But actually, when you eat food, you're actually eating your mind. That's hard for people to understand. Because that food is simply vibrations with no meaning, except for what we give them. And we have that desire. So basically, everything that's the meaning of like in yoga or Hinduism, they say Maya, illusion, and it's created by the perception. Now, we're not saying the object isn't there. Let it be there, but still, it's the mind that's creating its idea that this is nice and it's delicious and I want to eat it. But another person may hate that same kind of food, right? Or hate a certain kind of painting. So if an individual object had some absolute value of being good, bad, beautiful, ugly, everyone should experience it in the same way, don't you think? But they don't. So it shows you that it's the objects are created in the person's mind, especially in terms of liking, disliking, thinking it's good or bad, and then fighting to the death to try to, protect what it believes. But basically, it's just in their mind. So this is a very deep thing, and it's hard for the ordinary person to understand it. That's why, meditation is very deep, and it's not easy to understand. But anyway, that's the function of the perception. And then we react to that. Once we've identified it as being an object and clinging to it with our like or dislike, that triggers off our reaction. That means which include thoughts, emotions, desires, aversions, and that cause the body to, stab somebody with a knife, or tell lies, or steal something, or any other type of actions, even good actions too. But those are called the sankharas. So you can see that that's a process. That those 5 aggregates is a process. Is the mental process. The physical form, the rupa, is the material vibration coming through your ear, or your eye, nose, tongue, skin. And then it's felt as being something pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Then it's identified as being an object that has some concrete meaning and value that you've learned. And then you create karma based on that. That's where the karma arises, and that's sankhara, kanda, the 4th one. That's where we're creating our karma. The first 3 you can't do anything about, basically. That the perception, the feeling and the perception, these are already conditioning from the past. But the sankhara is where you can make changes in your reactions. And another thing about perception makes an object stand out separate from others. In other words, you look around the room and you see objects kind of, this and that, and they look like they're separate and standing out in time and space and depth perception, but that's created by the mind. That's created through the brain and the mental process. Otherwise, it would just be a one-dimensional thing. It would just look like a tapestry hanging on a wall. And you wouldn't be able to recognize anything. It's a perception that recognizes those certain forms and shapes, and kind of pulls them out so they stand out in time and space, looking separate from everything else. That's the function of the perception. And any doctor or scientist is going to tell you that that's true. That's where it happens. But anyway, so this is important to understand for understanding the nature of illusion and how we get trapped, how the mind gets trapped into its, fighting over likes and dislikes. It's so stupid. People fighting or killing over, somebody likes certain music and the other person doesn't, and they get angry and kill each other or over paintings or just anything. Even religions, politics, all that is just also created in the mind. And so, but anyway, we get attached to these things. The mind get attached to the feelings, and the perceptions, and then their mental, what's called the mental formations. So those are the first four of those aggregates. So basically, it's the mental process. And then the last one is consciousness. And the consciousness in this one refers to dualistic consciousness or ego consciousness. The sense of self arises with it. The sense of I am hearing, seeing, tasting, smelling, touching, deciding, liking, disliking. But that I is also simply created within the mental process. It's not something that exists independently on its own. As we learned with the baby wasn't born with a sense of I. And it only learned it after about 6 months to a year, when people started giving it all kind of attention and started learning languages. And then, of course, because of the ignorance from a past life, it did come back, but still, it wasn't there, at the time of birth, really. And it came about because, as I already mentioned, because of the past and the future, and wanting, remembering, self-identifying, I did this in the past and I want to do this in the future. So it's being recreated every moment. And all of those 5 aggregates come together in every moment of sense experience. Because every time you hear something, all those aggregates kind of, come together in that moment of hearing, where you recognize what it is and you decide what to do. In a split second. And maybe some of you have seen that in your own experience, in the meditation. How many of you in maybe today's meditation, had an experience where you were able to see how quickly the mind reacted to some sound or something happening on the body? In terms of you seeing something you liked or didn't like, and then forming a reaction to it and thoughts about it. And it happened very fast, right? Like even in a fraction of a second. And so that kind of thing, all those aggregates came together then, and you had the feeling of you were the one who was, experiencing that. But those come together in each moment of hearing, seeing, tasting, smelling. All of them come together to form what is called a chitta kalapa, or a mind moment. A mind moment. And that's happening millions of times, in a second. Even trillion. I've just heard somebody, looked it up on AI or something or whatever. It's happening so fast. That's why we don't see that process as being impermanent. And then the illusion of, permanence has been created in the mind. Anyway, so that is the 5 aggregates. And that clinging to that is the deepest source of the suffering. and clinging to it as being I, me, and mine, or as being something real and permanent. And because of that, people will fight to the death and create so much suffering. Now, does anybody have any questions? Any of you have any questions concerning what we just mentioned?
Bhante, you said that out of this vibration, mind perception generates objects. So there must be some sort of a pattern according to which mind generates objects, because like we all can point at a flower and say, oh, it's flower, though definitely we have different perceptions of the same flower, but we all can identify an object as what it is.
Because you're in the human realm. So you have the karma and the nervous system and the past experience connected with the human realm. Now, a cat won't know that. They'll see it as something different. Animals don't perceive things the same way we do. I mean, they see objects, but they mean different things to them. Because they have animal karma. They were born to be an animal. They have a different karma. The structure of their brain and their perception and everything is different. And the same with other beings in other realms. So, but also the meaning. If a human baby, unfortunately, we read about some babies that were thrown on the side of the road or abandoned by their, mother or something, and were raised by a wolf or deer, raised out in the forest. And if you didn't teach them what a flower was, they wouldn't know what it what it was. They might eat it, think it's just some fruit, like deers eat flowers, right? They don't put them on a vase, and bow to them or whatever. So, it's that conditioning that the object is there. We don't deny that the objects are not there, but it's what the mind does to it. The individual mind will create its own idea of what it is, and to struggle and like it or dislike it according to its conditioning. That's the main thing. It's not that these things don't exist, but it's how do they exist in our mind? That's why in the Buddhist teaching, the physical world is not so important. It's the mental world. And when the Buddha talked about the world, he mentioned the world of seeing, hearing, tasting, smelling, touching, and thinking. Now it's a counterpart to maybe the physical world, but that's not what's important, because the suffering is in your mind. The Buddhist teaching is all about suffering. It's not about whether this earth is real or not, or whether it was formed 5 million years ago or 10 billion years ago. He wasn't interested in that. Or whether it was created by a god or anybody else. No, that doesn't interest him. Because even if it was, there's still suffering. Right? Christians suffer, Muslims suffer, they all believe in God, but they're suffering like crazy. So it doesn't matter, because it's the way you're living and thinking. This is what the Buddha wanted to point out.
So basically the objects are all material, basically. Everything physical is material, and it's just us giving a meaning to that. Well,
it may be more complicated than that. I mean, because in physics, it breaks down all material things into just, as we've already mentioned, just, electrons and cells and so on. But when the billions of them are packed together, then they form something that we call a fingernail, or that we call a rock. But all those things can be disintegrated. Look, you throw this 150-pound body onto a fire, solid and everything else, and within 2 hours, it can be reduced to just ashes. no hard physical elements, anything, nothing there. So, so whether the things are, the Buddha wasn't interested in calling things real or not real, but for him it was, how do they appear to be real? That's the point. How do they appear to be real? Because to an ordinary person, they're real. You can't deny that to him. But you can't say they're absolutely real. So somebody who has the wisdom of a Buddha, they don't say things are real, but on the other hand, the relative sense, they can't say that they're real either. But and again, it's not about being real or unreal, it's about how they cause you suffering. Again, that's the most important part of the Buddhist teaching, is how is it causing you suffering? That's the thing. You have a question?
Yeah, you said we can't change the first three, right? Form, feeling, and perception. But if we advance on a path enough, wouldn't we possibly be able to start to perceive things in a little different or less solid way?
Yes, but you still would know on a relative sense. Look, the Buddha was fully enlightened, but he still talked to people. He didn't say, you're not real, I'm not going to talk to you. Or, the monkeys brought him fruit in the forest and so on. Thank you, monkey. Okay. So, but he didn't cling to the things. So Buddha was like sitting in a windowsill. Now you can look out and you can see, trees, there's a dog, there's a bear, all these things. You accept. It's the world. But at the same time, within a finger snap, you can turn your head and look into emptiness. When it wasn't needed to get involved in the external world, you can tune into the emptiness. That easy if you reach that kind of level. So you can have the best of both worlds, because you accept that you had the karma to be born, one more time in the human realm. But that was his last birth. He said, enough, I don't need to come back anymore. So that's the main thing. No ordinary person cannot just shift their mind back and forth like that. There's a saying, okay, there was a philosopher in England named Berkeley, and he had this belief that everything is unreal, nothing is real. And he used to go on telling that to everybody. So he had a friend who was another, friend that they were walking with. They were taking a walk by a river on a summer day, and this guy was trying to, telling his friend, nothing is real, nothing is real. And his friend started, getting a little bit annoyed by this. And so they were standing there, and he picked up a big stone, big rock, and threw it down on Berkeley's foot. And Berkeley jumped up, grabbed his foot, and screamed. Blood was running out. And his friend was saying, Berkeley, what are you doing? That rock is not real. Your foot is not real. So Berkeley was just spouting a philosophy, and wasn't able to put it into truth, So anyway, you have a question back? No, there's a person in the back.
So we can't do anything about form, feeling, and perception. When it comes to reactions, what can
With mindfulness, that's the point. That's the whole practice of Dhamma revolves around this point, is the intention. After you've perceived the object, then a craving will arise, either to get the object or get away from the object or to ignore the object. But you have a decision to make. So you might be thinking, let's say when you're meditating and a mosquito lands on you. And then, you hear a sound, right? Immediately that's a mosquito. And then don't land him, don't land him, don't land him. Having the fear because you're imagining something from the past, imagining the future, it's going to cause you pain in the next couple seconds. And then you might be really worrying about it and think, I'm gonna smash it, kill it, if it does land on you. But if you have mindfulness, you can think, well, this mosquito, it's just a living creature. It's also trying to find happiness, just like me. In fact, I applied this meditation. I'll tell you in a minute. And I've eaten a lot of meat in my life. I've taken the blood of animals. So, you little mosquito, take a little blood. And you send it metta. And you don't kill it. So you had a decision. You could have, or you could have not. But it depends on your understanding. Right? And that way you change. You can change the karma. You can change the habit of just killing anything that comes around or developing compassion and not doing that. And when I was a young monk in Sri Lanka, I was very gung-ho, wanting to attain Nibbana in 3 weeks or something like that. Didn't happen, but anyway. But in Sri Lanka, there's a lot of bloodthirsty mosquitoes. And as a monk, we had a little cabin in the woods, little hut, kuti. We had a walking path. Each kuti had a walking path of about 30 or 40 feet. And with a seat at the end where you'd walk for an hour and you'd sit for an hour. You get up and walk for another hour and sit down for another hour. The whole day long. And I did that. The mosquitoes used to come out at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So I was practicing very intently. It's very hot and humid there. So, I was out in the forest and no one else is around. So I might, take off my outer robe and just sit kind of, from here without any, shirt on or anything. Then the mosquitoes would come. And they would just, hundreds of them. You couldn't even hardly see your skin anymore because they were all biting. But I was practicing this meditation on it's all illusion, and sending them metta, and just as I said, I thought, well, I spilled a lot of blood of animals when I was younger, so take my blood, may you be well and happy. And after that, it caused a little bit of itching, but only for just a couple of minutes. And because I didn't have a bad reaction, no welts came about. Or if they did, they disappeared within 5 or 10 minutes. And so, I did that as a challenge, but it shows you that, you can change, the habits if you have enough determination. And then I thought if I could do that, I'd go sit down on an anthill. So sit on an anthill and have the mosquitoes all over here and have the ants all the way down underneath. Now, either you go mad or you have to let go, or you go crazy. And I know you think I'm crazy, but you get a lot of insight into, your reactions that way. And sure, it might have been pain, but for the time being, but it goes away. but it shows you what the mind can do if it really wants to. And that's the kind of thing that I learned in my years of meditating in the forest and so on. But anyway, so
Isn't that just good old-fashioned self-discipline that you could learn in the military?
well, the military may give you some, not that kind of. Yeah, I mean, survival training and stuff like that. They make these Navy SEALs and all these other kind of military guys. They torture them like that too, but they can overcome it. Anyway, so but coming back to this point of how can we reverse the accumulation of especially the negative karma. And there's, how many people have read the Buddhist doctrine about the 12 links of dependent origination? One of the cornerstone teachings of the Dhamma. The 12 links of dependent origination is called Paticca Samuppada, conditional arising. And it illustrates the second and the third noble truth, how suffering arises and how it ceases. And we're going to read that in tonight's puja. But basically it goes, depending on ignorance, volitional formations arise. Depending on volitional formations, consciousness arises. Depending on consciousness, the mind and body arise, and so on until it's, and then craving, grasping, becoming, then birth, suffering, and death. The whole mass of suffering arises, starting with the ignorance. And how does it cease? It reverses that process. From the cessation of ignorance, volitional formations cease. When volitional formations cease, consciousness ceases. And back down to suffering ceases. It's very, very powerful teaching. But it takes a lot of kind of study and understanding to do that. But out of all those 12 links, there are at least 4 or 5 are the most important that deal with the karma and the repetition of the karma, whether it's good karma or bad karma. But in this sense, reducing the kind of karma that brings the suffering. So, as I said with the other aggregates, once we're born, we already have the body, and we have the ignorance that came from the previous life, and a lot of our volitional formations. We have our mind, body, there's feelings, perceptions coming. But in that, so where we practice meditation is we're trying to be alert for the contacts. That means when we hear a sound, that's contact. That means a vibration has struck the nerves, and it sends a impulse through the nervous system. That's called contact. The technical word in the Buddhist psychology, contact. Sound touches your ear, visible vibrations strike your eye, pressure on the skin, taste, and even thoughts, mind contact. Like if a memory pops into your mind, the thought of your mother pops into your mind kind of spontaneously. So that's a mental object, but you can notice it, right? And you can also decide to think about it or not to think about it. So anyway, the contact, we can't do anything about that because our senses are opened all the time. And then those contacts produce a feeling. Depending on the contact, the feeling arises. If there's no contact, the feeling's not going to arise. And we can't do anything about the feeling either, because it's conditioned already from the past life, or all of our life up to the point, just before now. That means the way we interpret the feeling. Because what used to cause you a pleasant feeling could cause you a painful feeling later on, and what caused you a painful feeling in the past, you could change to making it to a pleasant feeling. Like most of you know my famous avocado story, how I hated avocados when I was young, but I used the Dhamma to change my attitude about them, and now I love them. So they used to cause me a painful feeling, now they cause me a pleasant feeling. But that was done to the mind, changing my attitude toward it. And we can do that about almost about anything. So anyway, so the parts of that dependent origination, starting with even the contact we can't do anything about, and the feeling we can't do anything about, but we can be aware of the feeling. So that's why that awareness, the second foundation of mindfulness, is the mindfulness of feelings. Once you get centered in the body, we can't really do anything to change the body, but we get centered in the body. So the whole of the 4 foundations of mindfulness, the first one is about just creating the right conditions, getting centered, concentrated, so that we have a front row seat to the feeling. So dependent on feeling, craving arises. That means craving is the initial desire. Let's say or aversion, pain starts to come and you see that kind of aversion, that kind of contraction. And if you have good mindfulness, you could just be aware, okay, feeling, it's pain, there's no big deal, it's not gonna kill me, and you can learn to tolerate it, and maybe not move. But if you don't have that kind of mindfulness and understanding, that annoyance will then, cause you to, want to get rid of it, because we have low pain tolerance. So, but craving is just that initial reaction, like liking it or not. But if you have mindfulness, you can not react to it either way. So by not reacting to it, we wouldn't create any karma around it. But if we react, like scratching the itch, you've just reinforced and re-strengthened that habit of aversion. And you've also re-strengthened the ego. I got rid of it. I won. Anyway, after the craving, depending on craving, grasping arises. So these 2 points, the transition between craving and grasping is the most important part of the Paticca Samuppada. Well, maybe I shouldn't say the most important, but there's one other, becoming. I'm just going to mention the grasping, craving, grasping, becoming. So the craving is the initial kind of pleasant or unpleasant feeling. I mean, the kind of the initial desire. And if you don't think more about it, it will just vanish and you'll notice something else and get distracted by something else, or just notice the next thing. But if you cling on to that idea, say, yes, I have to have that. My life depends on that. That's going to kill me if I don't get rid of it in the next 2 seconds. And you start thinking about it and scheming, how am I going to get it? How am I going to get away from it? That's called the grasping. Now you're grasping that idea, clinging to it with either like to actually get the object or planning a way to get away from it. That's called the grasping. The initial craving, if you have mindfulness, it won't turn into grasping. That's why it's a key for the practice of transformation. Now, a lot of people You know, you hear the Buddhist teaching. What does the second noble truth say? Usually it's called craving is the cause of suffering. Anybody hear that? Craving is the cause of suffering? Don't worry about craving. Worry about grasping. Because grasping leads to becoming. Grasping leads to the actual, the karmic action that you take. And that's the karma, is the becoming. And once you do the action, you can't take it back. And it's either become stronger or it's become weaker if you refrain from doing that action. So what I'm saying is craving is not really that important if you have strong mindfulness, because you can delay the becoming, or if you don't turn it into grasping, or even if it turns into grasping, you still have a last chance. So craving, grasping, and becoming. So the craving is the initial desire or aversion. And then if you have good mindfulness, you can not react to it, it'll drop away. But if it turns into grasping and you start planning and scheming, and that could go on for several minutes, deciding whether you're gonna kill that mosquito or not, or do something else, shout at somebody, so that process could take several seconds or even minutes. But at some point, you have to make a decision, right? At some point, after all the scheming, you could plot how to rob a bank or do something else, kill somebody for days or weeks, but at the last minute, you could drop that idea and, not get put in prison or, commit some crime. So it's that deciding point between grasping and becoming. That's really where the practice of transformation comes, but you can even stop it between craving and grasping. So those two places are where you apply. You have two or three chances. If you can't cut it off just with feeling and it goes to craving, okay, you can contemplate that and you can cut it off there. If that doesn't work and it goes on to grasping, you can contemplate it there, but it comes to that point of no return, the point of no return. Are you going to do it or not do it? That's the thing. Are you going to shout obscenity to somebody, or are you going to keep quiet? Or you change and speak softly to them rather than cursing them or something? That's the point. But it comes to that, that exact point of doing the action. That's where is the last chance. The last chance. Because once you do it, you can't take it back. Let's say you told a lie about your friend or something, or somebody else. Even though you apologize 100 times, that person's not going to forget about it. No. So you can't take it back, really. That's gone into the ether. It's gone into the cosmic reckoning. So, just to use those terms. So that's really, the whole Dhamma is about that. The whole practice of Dhamma is right there in those three critical segments of how we're going to transform our mind, whether we're going to continue to do the negative actions that keep the process of suffering continuing indefinitely, or are we going to start reversing the accumulation of the negative karma and accumulate the wholesome karma, which will help supplant that. But it comes down to those three critical points where feeling produces craving, grasping, and grasping becoming. And then, dependent on becoming is birth. This is also interesting, but it's not so critical. Because birth is going to happen. As long as there's becoming, birth is going to happen. You can't really do anything about birth because you have to change the becoming. The kind of birth you're going to have is due to the becoming, the karmic accumulation that's accumulated, your life and on your deathbed. So, but birth is very interesting. It's the ego that's reborn, not the physical body. Again, I've mentioned before, in Dhamma, everything's on two levels. There's the gross level, external level, and then there's the internal level. So when we talk about birth, okay, a baby is born. But the birth from the Dhamma point of view, from the supramundane point of view, it's the rebirth of the ego consciousness and the strengthening of ignorance through that production of the karma, through that action. Because once you've done something to get the object of your desire, it's strengthened. I won, I got it. The I is strengthened. Or if you get away from some painful thing, I also won, I got rid of that idiot, or that pain. So the ego is strengthened with each of those actions, and that's why it's called birth, because it will come again. Now, the Buddha attained enlightenment. He lived 45 years after enlightenment, but he wasn't born again, neither physically nor mentally. The ego had dissolved at the point of his full enlightenment. So for him, this paticca samuppada ceased at that time when he attained full enlightenment. So even birth didn't arise, and therefore no suffering arose, because suffering is caused by birth and death. That's why the Buddha attained deathlessness, because birth and death is about the ego on the internal, deepest level. Now this is, almost impossible for the average person to understand it. That's why Dhamma is deep, and you can't just go and give a Dhamma talk, in Home Depot or something. I want to pay my house. You say it doesn't exist. Okay. Even the Buddha would go into Home Depot probably. Yeah, I got a house. But it's empty. But okay. So so that that's why we don't say that the Buddha died, because the death of the body was not real. The Buddha had already died before his body died. In the suffering. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that, because in the meditation, the Vipassana meditation, that's really the critical factor in changing the way you think and the way you act. It's right there, and understanding that transition between craving, grasping, and becoming. Oh, just one last thing. I usually tell this story that about, when somebody dies, they always want to find out the exact cause of death, don't they? So they take the body to the coroner and then do an autopsy and, try to find the exact cause of death. And so I used to go to Brazil. I'm going again in February, to a Buddhist group down in Brazil. And the chief pathologist, or the coroner of the biggest hospital in Sao Paulo, thousands of people die every night, she invited me to an autopsy. I always wanted to go to one. I never had the right opportunity for many years. So this was about 6-7 years ago. I was down there. I went to an autopsy. Went down in the basement. We had all these cadavers from the night before that were laid out on a table, and all these students and everybody were cutting them up. And so she, had to put on a white kind of hazmat suit or something like that, over my robes and go in there. And so this one body was there, and this one guy was, starting to cut the skull off. With an old rusty hacksaw, just like we have in the garage. Really shocked me. What am I using that? Like sawing a 2x4, sawing this guy's skull, around. And I was just watching, and I was trying to see my reaction, if I would, what kind of a reaction would I have? But, I've been training myself for 40 years. So, it's just, and then it gets all the way through, and then, kind of, there was one little hinge of the skull that was, still stuck. So he got an old rusty chisel out of his box, with a hammer, and goes, "Poof!" And the top of the skull went flying across the room, and the brain was hanging out. And I was looking at it, oh, cool. And then the doctor took out the skull and was trying to punch it around and see if they could find an embolism or what, maybe what was the cause of the death in the brain. And then did the same thing with the heart. And then she actually let me hold this guy's brain in my hand, and I was just looking at it. I was thinking, oh my gosh, it was 24 hours ago, this thing was, full of sparks and, a live person. Now it's just a cold piece of flesh. And of course, I had trained my mind for understanding that, so it didn't cause any reaction. But then I asked the doctor, did you find the cause of death? After she checked the heart and the brain. She said, well, sometimes the symptoms are kind of overlapping, or, it's hard to tell exactly sometimes. Somebody had a lot of different problems, But they have to write something on a death certificate. Isn't that right, doctor? Of course, you deal with birth, not death so much. So I said, if you can't find the exact cause of death, you write on the certificate, birth. What is the cause of death? Birth. Isn't it? So why do people all get upset about wanting to find the exact cause of death? Birth is the cause of death. Because when you're born, that's going to be the result. So why worry whether it was a heart attack or it was a brain aneurysm or any other bloody thing? Of course, in crimes, they have to then try to find out who did it, right? And maybe for that reason, it could be useful, but otherwise, what does it matter? The person died of old age, of sickness. But of course, medicine won't buy that. They'll have to. Anyway, that's another issue. So, does anybody have any questions about, especially that Paticca Samuppada and about that process I was talking about?
First, just wanted to mention when you were saying like death, birth, maybe it was wise to mention like a moment by moment birth, like, the moment of consciousness, birth and death, and karmic.
Yes.
Okay, not just like life birth, but, moment to moment birth.
Yes.
That's where we practice, right? So that we can.
Yeah. Birth and death, again, it has two levels. Okay, a baby is born, lives 50, 60 or more years and dies. So that's the common, external birth and death. And then it's reborn. But the internal is this birth and death of mind moments, which refers to impermanence. That everything is just has a momentary existence because of a firing of the brain, a spark, but it vanishes. It doesn't even exist hardly. The existence is, less than 1/10 of a nanosecond before it's replaced with something else. But it's occurring so fast, we don't see the breaks in between. So that the illusion of it being solid or permanent is created. That's the main thing. And it's similar to an animated movie. or even a roll of film that I was mentioning before. In the old days, movie rolls were made up of individual frames, and they were put on a film and run through a projector with a space between each frame of the thing. Or in an animated thing, an artist has to, for every minute movement of Donald Duck, they have to create a new photo, right? And then they flash it very quickly, and it looks like they're real, right? Doing something. So the mind basically is working the same way, but it's causing, even just to do that, the brain probably fired 1,000,000 times. Or just to think and decide, oh, I'm going to get up now, probably required 1,000,000 firings of neurons in the brain that go between the feelings and the memory and everything else. But we don't see that. And so we feel that we are deciding to doing things, and these are just, movements, but actually it's just chopped up like that. And so that's what actually in Vipassana, we train our mind to try to experience, at least to some degree, that happening. And that's why, especially today in the walking meditation, I was giving that instruction. Did anybody try that? In the walking meditation this morning, when I was trying to have you put a little space between each small movement of the foot. You see the lifting is one thing, swinging forward is another, lowering down was another, moving the body forward was another, and so on. Could anybody kind of get at least some kind of glimpse or understanding that it was kind of happening that way? Well, so magnify that by 1,000, and then you would be practicing Vipassana, or you would come to, well, maybe not even 1,000, but anyway, just magnify that a lot. Or to continue that for a couple of hours without any interruption, then the consciousness would start acting like a slow motion projector, just noticing each frame. That happened to me one time when I was meditating in Sri Lanka. I had a little room in a block. There was a block of rooms in the monastery I was at. This was actually before, I think it was even before I was a monk. Could have been just afterwards. But anyway, a little small room, 4 feet wide by about 8 foot long. It was just a concrete bed in it. And then, so I had been practicing for like a couple of months. It's very intensive. I mean, you would not believe the way I practiced. I mean, it took me a whole day just to do 1 or 2 things. I was walking so slowly. I would have been put in a mental institution here if I'd been moving that slowly out in the park or something. But my teacher encouraged me to do that. And even though people were looking at me weird, I really got some powerful experiences, and it went on automatic pilot. But anyway, I went to sleep one night in the room. And I woke up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom. And we had the bathroom was down a long corridor. We had this block of rooms, maybe 10 rooms, just with a little curtain on each one. And then at the end of the hallway, 20, 30 feet down, were some bathroom stalls. So the moment I woke up, I felt woke up and realized I needed to go to the bathroom. So I opened the eyes, and it just started automatically, just exactly like a slow motion picture, just going like that. Moments of consciousness and it was like I wasn't even watching. It was just, this body was getting up. It was going out the door, walking all the way down the hall, going in, doing what I had to do, and come back. The whole time it was just, I was just watching this. It was like watching a movie. Just each of those flashing like that. And I came back to the room and laid down. Then it all stopped. And I got up in the morning, and I was come back to kind of normal consciousness. But that was a very powerful experience. But that was the experience of, what you call, the anicca, the real anicca sanya, and seeing how, the mind is just made up of these frames. They're just flashing that fast. But anyway.
I had a second question. So, just wanted to understand better craving. It's like you talked about negative craving, but we have, like, life consists of all this, what we call, how do we call it, motivation, right? Like American dream, good job, a car, whatever, or some people, different countries. But motivation is part of life, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be motivation to commit a crime or some sort of atrocity. So how do we, it still generates karma, right? So how does one go without this kind of motivation for a regular life? If it is possible, how does it look?
Well, you have to, each person basically has to decide for themselves. Look at my case. I was just a happy-go-lucky, drug-crazed hippie, following the hippie trail from Europe to India, minding my own business, or maybe not minding my own business, getting in a lot of mischief, and not knowing anything about religion or anything else. And then I heard about this meditation course, and something just opened up inside. Like, I got to do that. I don't know where it came from. It just came out of the blue and just boom. Of course, I know why it came, because I almost got killed in Afghanistan because of drugs and so on. So I knew I had to change my mind and get off of drugs, but I didn't know how. But then when I heard about the meditation course, it just jumped out, and that was my motivation. To get out of the self-created suffering that was causing myself and so many other people due to my selfish, wanting to be a hippie and just following the crowd, basically. So that was my motivation. And then the motivation to become a monk. I could decide, right? Although I say it wasn't really me deciding. It was karma deciding for me, so to speak. But nevertheless, that was my motivation, to cleanse the mind from all this, negative stuff that was causing me and my family and other people, my mother and father, a lot of grief. And that was a motivation that, continued. So basically, each person kind of like chooses what they're going to do. But it's not a self that's choosing, really. It's karma, and it's a lot of other things. But it is the motivation. That was my motivation, and that was the Buddha's motivation too. Why he left the palace life. And so and each person's life path takes a different way, depending, and it's all influenced heavily by the past karma. That answer your question? Okay, I think we've gone far enough. You can write any questions, any other questions that you may have for tonight, because we still want to have our meditation practice. Okay. So again, like we did yesterday, just kind of just sit up for a moment, close your eyes, take a deep, slow breath, see how quickly you can bring your mind inside, touch base with the body. Just take a deep, slow breath, hold the air in your lungs for as long as you comfortably can. Feel the body. Slowly let out the breath. Feel the last bit of air go out. Feel that relaxation. Okay. Now go ahead and mindfully stand up, do a short standing awareness, another session of walking around, a little exercise for your legs. And sit down again. Let's do some 3-part breathing. The more you practice, consciously practice that 3-part breathing, the more automatically it become. Okay, now, practice some walking meditation for a little bit before sitting down again, so just to move the cushions or something. Get into the session. Move this camera. So even while you're doing walking meditation, if something occurs, try to see that you can understand that process of contact, feeling, craving, grasping, you react to something, becoming. Just you can even do that while you're standing and walking, because that process occurs all the time, anywhere.